Welcome back to the deep dive. It is great to have you with us today.
Yeah, really glad you're joining us.
We usually bring you a massive stack of articles or, a pile of cross-reference studies to synthesize.
A whole library sometimes.
Right, exactly. But today our focus is entirely on a single, highly concentrated source.
Just one text.
Just one. It's an excerpt from a Substack document titled Episode 531, Non-Speaking, When Speech is Coerced.
That's a heavy one.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore this deeply personal and surgically analytical account of institutional treatment.
Which is rare to find written with such clarity.
Completely. We're looking at the stark difference between achieving true internal healing and merely performing acceptable behavior just to survive a rigid system.
Survival being the key word there.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this because reading this piece feels less like reading a traditional journal entry and much more like looking at a blueprint.
Right, it's very structural. The author is essentially reverse engineering the psychological machinery of a treatment facility from the inside out.
From the very bottom.
Exactly. And the author sets the scene by documenting this intense, almost suffocating level of observation during their stay in this facility.
They describe a state of hyper-awareness.
Yes, where every vocalization is scrutinized. They note how certain tones of voice, quote, signaled instability, while other tones reassured the staff.
And yet other tones triggered notation.
Triggered notation, right?
Absolutely.
We are talking about the sheer mental load of living in an environment where every sound you make, every minor inflection of your voice is actively being monitored.
Categorized and documented in real time.
By the people who control whether you get to leave.
Imagine living under that kind of microscope.
It's exhausting just to think about.
Right. I mean, you and I might experience something vaguely similar during a high-stakes job interview or maybe a performance evaluation.
Where you become hyper-aware of your posture or your hands.
The pitch of your voice, exactly. But that lasts an hour. For the author, this was their entire existence. If they sounded a little too flat or a little too loud, someone with a clipboard or a tablet was quite literally writing it down.
Creating a permanent record of their instability.
Exactly. It makes complete sense that the author describes a profound shift in perspective that had to happen just to survive this environment. They state very plainly, I adjusted.
But they did not adjust because they were magically cured.
No.
Or experienced some grand mental health breakthrough.
Right. They adjusted because they figured out the underlying mechanics of the facility.
What's fascinating here is the absolute clarity with which the author separates their own internal state from institutional compliance.
It's a really sharp divide.
It is. They explicitly write that they did not adjust because they acquired self-knowledge in neat clinical sentences.
Neat clinical sentences.
Yeah, that phrase is a sharp critique of how recovery is often expected to look.
There's this expectation that patients will eventually adopt the vocabulary of their therapists.
Right, articulating their trauma or their condition in perfectly packaged diagnostic terms.
But the author's true motivation for changing their behavior was entirely pragmatic.
It was survival. They recognized what they call the logic of the system.
Output was being evaluated?
The cold reality was a simple equation. Certain outputs shortened the stay while others extended it.
It is a purely transactional dynamic. It ceases to be about how the individual actually feels and becomes entirely about what they output into the room.
It feels almost algorithmic.
Yes, exactly. If I press this button, if I use this specific reassuring tone of voice, I get to leave sooner.
And if I press that button, if I show frustration or flatness, I get held here longer.
Which brings us to a striking, incredibly blunt admission from the author. They say, I learned to perform acceptable. And it worked.
That is so powerful.
The entire stated goal of a medical institution like this is presumably to help to heal, to treat the individual.
Presumably, yeah.
But the practical result in this case was training a human being to put on a highly specific, carefully calibrated performance of wellness.
Because the system is built to look for those specific external markers of wellness, the performance is what gets rewarded.
Not the actual healing.
Exactly. The author describes their eventual discharge from the facility not as a medical or personal revelation, but as an alignment with expectations.
The system possessed a predetermined set of expectations for what a ready-to-be-discharged patient looked like.
Sounded like and acted like. The author recognized that mold and simply contorted themselves to fit it.
They note that the words they delivered fit the chart. They fit the treatment narrative.
Let's talk about that phrase, fit the chart.
Let's do it.
A chart does not capture a human being's actual internal landscape.
No, a chart consists of checkboxes, scales of 1 to 10, and drop-down menus.
To fit the chart means you have to shave off all your complex, messy human emotions.
And reduce yourself to a clean data point that the facility's protocol can easily process.
You supply the data they require, so they will open the door and let you out.
The author frames the result of all this performing as a way of reducing institutional friction.
Institutional friction. That is a concept we really need to dig into.
I agree, because it explains so much of how large systems interact with individuals.
Institutional friction occurs whenever an individual interacts with a large, structured system, whether that is a hospital, a massive corporation, or a government agency.
The system inherently wants things done in a standardized, predictable, uniform way.
But the individual, by their very nature, is unstandardized and unpredictable.
And when the individual resists the system's norms, friction occurs.
Right. In the context of a treatment facility, friction might look like a patient refusing to participate in a specific group activity.
Or expressing a negative emotion in a way the staff finds disruptive to the schedule.
And the system responds to this friction with sanctions, with that notation the author mentioned, and with extended stays.
The patient ultimately realizes that the fastest route to freedom is to lubricate the gears of the system by eliminating that friction entirely.
You stop fighting the current.
You just say what the system needs you to say. You know, I remember being in a corporate environment early in my career where I vehemently disagreed with a project's direction.
We've all been there.
I knew the strategy was flawed, but I quickly realized that continuing to push back was just creating friction that hurt my own standing with management.
It wasn't worth the cost.
Exactly. So I nodded, used the required corporate buzzwords, delivered the acceptable output, and got out of the meeting.
You eliminated the friction.
I want you, the listener, to think about where this happens in your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a highly structured environment where you realized you just needed to deliver the right words?
Rather than expressing your true state of mind.
Right. We all do this on some micro level just to get through the day, but the author is describing doing this on a macro level.
Where your actual physical freedom, your autonomy, and your perceived sanity are the stakes on the table.
It is a profound, high-stakes survival mechanism.
And the document becomes even more compelling when the author connects this deeply personal, localized experience of the treatment facility to a much broader psychological framework later in their life.
The text describes a realization that occurs years after their discharge.
The author encountered behaviorist models that were framed in professional literature as evidence-based optimization.
Evidence-based optimization.
Instantly, they recognized the structural logic. It was the exact same underlying architecture they had experienced and survived in the facility.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author realizes that the survival game they were playing to get out of the facility has a formal clinical name.
They are talking about Applied Behaviour Analysis, or ABA.
ABA is a widely known, heavily utilized psychological intervention, often discussed in the context of neurodivergent individuals.
And the author is incredibly deliberate with their wording in this section.
They do not launch a fiery emotional attack on the practice.
No, the source explicitly says, not ABA as caricature, not therapists as villains.
That is a highly mature, fascinating pivot.
They intentionally remove the emotion to focus strictly on the underlying mechanics of the practice.
That deliberate nuance serves a specific purpose.
By stating not therapists as villains, the author acknowledges that the people working inside these systems often have good intentions.
Clinicians are following their training. They genuinely believe they are helping patients adapt.
The author is not interested in assigning moral blame to individual healthcare workers.
Instead, they are elevating the critique to examine the logic itself.
They distill ABA down to a pure three-step formula. As they write it, reinforce output, extinguish noncompliance, shape behavior toward norm.
That is the blueprint of behaviorism, stripped of all its clinical euphemisms and presented in its rawest form.
We should break down those 3 steps because they map perfectly onto the author's lived experience in the facility.
Let's do it. Step 1 is reinforce output.
When the author used the specific tones of voice that reassured the staff, or when they delivered those neat clinical sentences that fit the chart, they were rewarded with a shorter stay.
The system reinforced the behavior it wanted to see.
Step 2 is extinguish noncompliance. Now, extinguish is a heavy word.
It is.
But in behaviorism, extinguishing basically means starving a behavior of oxygen.
Precisely. It means ensuring that a non-compliant behavior yields absolutely no reward or results in a negative consequence until the person simply gives up trying to do it.
When the author exhibited tones that signaled instability, they were not met with comforting dialogue.
They were met with cold notation or the threat of an extended stay.
The system was actively working to extinguish those natural expressions of instability by making them entirely counterproductive to the patient's goal of leaving the facility.
It is a process of wearing the individual down until the unwanted behavior disappears.
That leads directly to the final step, step 3, shape behavior toward norm.
This is the ultimate objective of the system.
The institution holds a predefined idea of what a normal or healthy person looks like, and it uses the reinforcement and the extinguishing to mold the patient into that exact shape.
It circles right back to the concept of fitting the chart.
The chart represents the norm. The patient is the raw material.
The system pushes, pulls, and shapes until the material matches the chart's requirements.
This raises an important question, one that the author grapples with at the very end of our source excerpt.
Because as clinical rigid and potentially damaging as this logic sounds in the context of psychiatric care, the author does not dismiss the framework entirely.
They acknowledge the dual nature of this logic.
The text trails off with a careful concession. In some contexts, this logic may build skill. It may scaffold access. It may...
And the excerpt leaves us hanging right there.
On the precipice of a massive ethical tension.
That abrupt ending leaves a serious impact. We can clearly see the tension the author is pointing out.
There is undeniable utility to behaviorist logic in certain situations.
Think about someone in physical rehabilitation recovering from a severe injury or a stroke.
Behaviorist principles are often used to push them through incredibly difficult, painful physical therapy to regain mobility.
The therapists reinforce the correct movements and extinguish the compensatory, harmful movements.
That process is building a vital skill. It is scaffolding access to the physical world.
It works, and the logic itself is highly effective for that purpose.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound tension in the text lies in where society draws the line.
Applying behaviorist conditioning to help someone regain physical mobility is generally accepted as scaffolding access.
But applying that exact same conditioning to someone's neurological identity,
or forcing them to suppress their natural ways of emotional expression, just to make them appear more normal to the surrounding society,
enters an entirely different landscape.
The author is pointing out how dangerously thin the line is between scaffolding a necessary life skill and coercing a vulnerable person into masking their true self.
Which ties brilliantly back to the title of the document, When Speech is Coerced.
The author's central argument is that when you are placed in a system where your output is constantly evaluated and you are forced to perform acceptable behavior just to survive or reduce friction, your speech is no longer your own.
It is coerced.
You are not communicating your internal truth. You are simply echoing the system's demands back to it.
Forced acceptable output is a form of coercion disguised as communication.
It is a hostage tape masquerading as a clean bill of health.
When the stakes involve your autonomy or your literal discharge from a locked facility, your compliance cannot be confused with genuine communication,
let alone genuine healing.
The system may look at the perfectly shaped behavior, see that it aligns with expectations, and log it as a success story.
The chart looks pristine.
Internally, however, the individual has simply learned that their authentic self is a liability that must be hidden at all costs.
They have been systematically trained to become an actor in their own life.
This has been an incredibly dense, thought-provoking deep dive into a very concentrated piece of text.
We really covered a lot of ground today.
We journeyed through the author's stark realization, starting with the sheer exhaustion of being constantly monitored, where even the tone of your voice triggers notation.
We examined the fundamental difference between actually experiencing healing and simply learning the rules of compliance to survive the chart.
We unpack the reality of institutional friction and how performing the expected narrative is often the most pragmatic way out.
Finally, we looked at the underlying logic of systems like ABA reinforcing output, extinguishing non-compliance, and shaping toward a norm.
And that incredibly thin line between building a useful skill and coercing speech.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean?
Ultimately, the synthesis of this source material challenges us to reevaluate our definitions of evidence-based optimization in institutional care.
It forces us to look critically at the evidence we are so proud of collecting.
If the data that populates our charts and proves our treatments are working is gathered from individuals who feel forced to perform for us to reduce friction, then the evidence itself is flawed.
It suggests that sometimes what institutions celebrate as medical or psychological success is actually just the systematic erasure of an individual's authentic voice.
True care must be about more than just shaping behavior to fit a societal norm. It must account for the human being behind the output.
It is a vital reminder to look past the performance and question the metrics of success we rely on. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder on your own as you go about your day.
Something to carry with you.
We have spent this time analyzing clinical facilities and treatment programs, but consider the broader structures you navigate. If our modern societal systems, from corporate office cultures to university classrooms, are fundamentally built on rewarding acceptable output and punishing friction, how much of your own daily communication is actually authentic?
And how much is just you entirely unconsciously shaping your own behavior to the norm just to survive the system?
It is something to chew on the next time you find yourself giving the perfect answer. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We love exploring these challenging ideas with you. Stay curious, keep questioning the systems around you, and we will see you next time.